Welcome to All-Time Epic Stories. Today, we present, the Trojan Horse Deception, how ancient psychological warfare changed history forever. In the 13th century before Christ, on the windswept plains of ancient Anatolia, two civilizations stood locked in a conflict that would echo through eternity. The Trojan War had raged for 10 brutal years, transforming the beaches before Troy's impenetrable walls into a graveyard of heroes and a testament to human stubbornness. The Greeks had come for Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, stolen by Paris of Troy. But beneath this romantic facade lay deeper truths: trade routes, political dominance, and the pride of kingdoms. What began as a quest for honor had become a war of attrition that devoured generations. Troy's walls, built by the gods themselves according to legend, had proven impervious to every siege tactic known to ancient warfare. Battering rams splintered against them. Siege towers burned before reaching their heights. The city's defenders, led by the noble Hector, repelled every assault with devastating efficiency. As the 10th year of war dragged on, Greek morale crumbled like sand between desperate fingers. Soldiers who had left home as young men now bore gray in their beards. Sons had been born and grown to childhood without knowing their fathers. The cost in blood and treasure had become almost unbearable. It was in this crucible of desperation that Odysseus, king of Ithaca, began to formulate a plan that would transcend conventional warfare. Known for his cunning mind and silver tongue, Odysseus understood something fundamental: when strength fails, the mind must prevail. When walls cannot be breached, perceptions must be. The concept Odysseus proposed was revolutionary, even heretical to the warrior culture of his age. Rather than demonstrate strength, they would feign weakness. Rather than attack, they would appear to surrender. Rather than besiege the walls, they would make the Trojans themselves open the gates. The heart of the deception would be a massive wooden horse, a tribute to Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare. But this religious offering would be hollow, concealing within its belly a select group of Greek champions. It would be the ultimate Trojan gift, one that embodied the very principle it would name. Construction began in secrecy, hidden from Trojan scouts. Master craftsman Hippias was charged with creating this monumental deception. Every timber was selected for strength and silence. Every joint was fitted with meticulous care. The horse would need to appear magnificent while concealing its deadly purpose. As the horse took shape, Odysseus carefully selected the men who would hide within it. They needed to be not just skilled warriors, but possessed of extraordinary discipline and courage. They would spend hours cramped in darkness, unable to move or make sound, uncertain if their sacrifice would end in glory or death. The psychological preparation was as important as the physical construction. The men chosen for the horse were told to meditate on stillness, to practice breathing in silence, to master their own fear. One cough, one sneeze, one moment of panic could doom them all and waste the years of sacrifice. Simultaneously, Odysseus orchestrated the elaborate theater that would sell the deception. The entire Greek fleet would sail away, but only to the nearby island of Tenedos, hidden from Troy's view. The camps would be burned, creating the appearance of absolute departure. Every detail mattered in this grand illusion. Left behind would be Sinon, a Greek soldier who volunteered for perhaps the most dangerous role of all. He would allow himself to be captured, beaten, and interrogated. His lies would need to be so convincing, so layered with seeming truth, that even under torture he would maintain the fiction. The plan relied on understanding the Trojan psychology after 10 years of war. They would be exhausted, eager to believe in victory, susceptible to confirmation bias. The Greeks would exploit every cognitive weakness, the desire for closure, the tendency to see what one wishes to see, the trust in divine signs. As dawn broke on the planned day of deception, the massive wooden horse stood completed on the beach. 40 feet tall, its craftsmanship was extraordinary. It appeared as a genuine tribute, ornately carved and magnificent. Inside its hollow belly, the chosen warriors climbed into history. Odysseus himself led the warriors into the horse's interior. With him went Menelaus, for whom the war was fought. Diomedes, the fearless champion. Neoptolemus, son of the fallen Achilles, seeking to complete his father's legacy. Each man represented the flower of Greek martial prowess. The space inside was cramped and suffocating. As the final warrior entered, the secret door was sealed shut. Darkness enveloped them completely. The air immediately grew thick and hot. Now began the most agonizing part, the waiting, suspended between worlds, between life and death, between victory and annihilation. Outside, the great exodus began. Ship after ship pushed off from the beaches that had been Greek home for a decade. The camps that had housed armies were set ablaze. Soldiers who remained hidden in the ship's holds listened to their own camps burn, a strange reversal of normal siege warfare. From Troy's walls, sentries witnessed this apparent miracle. 10 years of war, ending not with a climactic battle but with retreat. Horns sounded throughout the city. Citizens who had known nothing but siege poured from their homes. Could it truly be over? Could the nightmare finally be ending? King Priam, aged by grief and war, stood upon the highest rampart. He had lost Hector, his noblest son, to Achilles' spear. He had seen generation after generation of Trojans die defending these walls. Now, watching the Greek fleet disappear beyond the horizon, tears of exhausted relief tracked down his weathered face. But caution held sway among the city's elders and priests. Calchas, a seer, warned of Greek treachery. Laocoon, the priest of Poseidon, voiced the suspicion that would become immortal, "I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts." His warning was the voice of wisdom that would go tragically unheeded. The Trojan gates, sealed for 10 years, groaned open for the first time since Paris brought Helen home. Soldiers ventured cautiously onto the plain, weapons ready for ambush. But they found only emptiness, smoldering ruins, and the detritus of a departed army. And one massive, inexplicable wooden horse. The horse dominated the plain, impossible to ignore. Its craftsmanship spoke of reverence and skill. Inscriptions declared it an offering to Athena for safe passage home. It was enormous, beautiful, and utterly out of place. The perfect bait for minds desperate to believe the war was truly over. Inside the horse, the Greek warriors heard the Trojan voices drawing near. Their bodies screamed for movement after hours of stillness. Sweat soaked their tunics in the airless darkness. Hands gripped weapons until knuckles whitened. One sound, one betrayal of presence, and all would be lost. Sinon, the designated sacrificial actor in this drama, allowed himself to be discovered hiding near the horse. Trojan soldiers dragged him before their officers, exactly as planned. His performance now would determine everything. He had rehearsed his lies so thoroughly that they had become a kind of truth. Through tears and apparent terror, Sinon wove his tale. The Greeks had grown tired of war, he claimed, and sought to appease Athena for their return. They had planned to sacrifice him, Sinon, but he had escaped. The horse was sacred, built too large to fit through Troy's gates precisely so the Trojans could not take it inside and claim its blessing. The reverse psychology was brilliant. By claiming the Greeks feared Troy bringing the horse inside, Sinon made that exact action desirable. He exploited the Trojan desire to turn Greek religion against them, to claim victory through the enemy's own sacred offering. Every word was a carefully crafted manipulation. Laocoon, the priest, denounced Sinon's story as obvious deception. In his passion to prevent catastrophe, he hurled his spear at the horse's flank. It struck with a hollow thud that echoed across the plain. For a moment, the sound of that impact hung in the air like an unspoken warning. Inside, the Greek warriors froze at the impact. The spear point had missed them by mere inches. Their breathing stopped entirely. Odysseus placed a hand over the mouth of the man next to him, a reminder of absolute silence. One reaction to the impact could expose them all. Then, as if the gods themselves conspired with the Greek deception, tragedy struck Laocoon. While he and his sons performed sacrifices at the beach, two enormous serpents emerged from the sea. The creatures, sent by Athena according to later accounts, coiled around the priest and his children with crushing force. Laocoon's screams echoed across Troy as the serpents crushed the life from him and his sons. The Trojans interpreted this as divine punishment for attacking the sacred offering. The gods had spoken, they believed. Laocoon's sacrilege had been answered with wrath. The horse must be holy indeed. This coincidence, this perfect timing, sealed Troy's fate more effectively than any siege weapon ever could. The psychological impact was devastating. Fear of divine displeasure overcame tactical caution. The Trojans decided not just to leave the horse outside, but to bring it within their walls in honor. The engineering challenge was immense. The horse was too large for the gates, just as Sinon had said. Rather than see this as confirmation of the deception, the Trojans saw it as proof of the offering's sanctity. They began to demolish a section of their own walls to admit the wooden colossus. The irony was profound. Walls that had withstood 10 years of Greek assault were now being breached by Trojan hands. The impregnable defenses that had cost so many Greek lives were being voluntarily dismantled. Security was being sacrificed on the altar of religious fervor and wishful thinking. As the breach widened, crews attached ropes to the horse. Hundreds of Trojans pulled in synchronized effort, chanting hymns to Athena. The massive wooden structure began to move, inch by inch, toward the gap in the walls. Children danced around it. Priests blessed it with sacred oils and prayers. Inside, the Greek warriors felt the movement and heard the celebrations. They understood that the plan was working beyond even Odysseus's hopes. The Trojans were not just accepting the horse, they were embracing it with religious fervor. But the motion and noise also meant greater risk of discovery. One woman in Troy maintained her suspicions. Cassandra, daughter of Priam, cursed by Apollo with prophecies none would believe, shrieked warnings through the streets. She tore her hair and proclaimed the doom within the horse. But her curse held true, her dire predictions were dismissed as madness. As evening fell, the horse finally passed through the breach in Troy's walls. The moment was celebrated with overwhelming joy. Wine flowed freely through the streets. 10 years of fear, rationing, and death were believed to be over. Troy erupted in the celebration it had been denied for a decade. The horse was positioned in the central plaza near Athena's temple. Garlands of flowers were draped over its neck. Offerings were placed at its feet. The Trojans danced around it, sang to it, treated it as a sacred talisman of their endurance and the gods' favor. Their relief blinded them to danger standing in their midst. The celebrations intensified as night deepened. Wine and relief created a potent intoxication. Guards abandoned their posts to join the revelry. Discipline dissolved into joy. The very vigilance that had kept Troy safe for 10 years evaporated in a single night of premature victory celebration. Sinon, now honored as a truth-teller by the gullible Trojans, moved through the city with careful purpose. He noted the positions of gates, the locations of armories, the placement of what few sentries remained sober. Every detail would matter in the hours to come. His performance had succeeded beyond measure. Inside the horse, the Greek warriors listened to the celebration surrounding them. The sound was almost unbearable, Trojans rejoicing in what they believed was the end of Greek threat, unaware that the heart of Greek military might sat among them. The psychological discipline required was superhuman. Hours passed like years. Gradually, the celebrations wound down. Exhausted Trojans stumbled to their homes. Guards who should have been on duty slept where they fell. The city that had maintained perfect vigilance for a decade fell into its deepest, most vulnerable sleep in 10 years. In the deepest watch of the night, Sinon made his move. He climbed to the city's highest point where a signal fire could be seen from the island of Tenedos. His hands shook slightly as he lit the torch, not from fear but from the magnitude of the moment. This flame would ignite the end of Troy. Miles away on Tenedos, Greek lookouts spotted the flame. Horns sounded across the island. Soldiers who had spent the day in anxious waiting leapt to their ships. The fleet that had supposedly sailed home in defeat now rowed furiously back toward Troy through the darkness, timing their arrival for maximum effect. Inside the horse, Odysseus heard Sinon's quiet signal at the base. The moment had arrived. He whispered commands in the darkness. Stiff fingers groped for weapons in the absolute black. The secret door was carefully, silently opened. Fresh air rushed in like salvation to men who had breathed the same fetid atmosphere for over 12 hours. One by one, the Greek champions descended from the horse on a rope ladder. Their muscles screamed from the long confinement. They moved like ghosts through the plaza, weapons ready, eyes adjusting to the dim light. Around them, Troy slept, unaware that death had emerged from the gift they had celebrated. Odysseus led them swiftly toward the main gates. Their footsteps were silent on the stone streets. Every shadow could conceal a late-night wanderer who might raise the alarm. But fortune, or the gods, favored the Greeks. The city remained wrapped in sleep and wine-induced stupor. At the gates, they found the guards unconscious from drink, exactly as hoped. The massive bars and locks that had protected Troy for 10 years were open from within. The gates swung wide on their great hinges. The breach that should never have been possible was accomplished without a sword being drawn. The Greek army, having run from their ships across the plain, poured through the open gates in a flood of bronze and fury. 10 years of frustration, loss, and humiliation now found release. The warriors who entered were not the diplomatic envoys who had first come for Helen, but hardened killers shaped by a decade of war. The first Trojan scream shattered the night. Fires began to bloom across the city as the Greeks put buildings to the torch. Soldiers woke to find enemies in their bedrooms. The nightmare that Troy had successfully kept outside its walls for 10 years was now inside, running through the streets with sword and flame. Trojan soldiers tried desperately to form defensive lines, but the surprise was total and devastating. They fought in their nightclothes, without armor, half awake and confused. The coordinated Greek assault met scattered, disorganized resistance. It was slaughter dressed as battle. King Priam, roused by the screams and fire, donned ancient armor that had not been worn since his youth. The elderly king understood that Troy's end had come, but he would meet it as a warrior. He gathered his remaining sons and household guards for a final stand at the palace altar. Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, found Priam at the altar. The old king could barely lift his sword, yet he raised it in defiance. The young Greek warrior, seeking to complete what his father had started, cut Priam down without mercy. The king who had ruled Troy through its greatest trials died at the foot of the gods he had served. Throughout the burning city, similar tragedies multiplied. Hector's widow Andromache was seized as a prize. Hector's son Astyanax was thrown from the city walls, the Greeks unwilling to let any male heir survive who might one day seek vengeance. 10 years of war ended in a single night of comprehensive destruction. Helen, the cause and symbol of the war, was found by Menelaus. His anger at her betrayal warred with his remembered love. In different accounts, their reunion varies, but all agree that she survived where Troy did not. Beauty proved more enduring than bronze walls or warrior courage. As dawn broke over Troy, the city that had stood for centuries was reduced to smoking ruins. The great walls still stood, but they enclosed only death and ash. The wooden horse stood in the plaza, surrounded by devastation, a monument to the power of deception over strength. The psychological warfare that had won the war where 10 years of combat failed became instantly legendary. The Trojan horse entered human consciousness as the ultimate symbol of deceptive strategy. What started as a desperate gambit became the template for understanding how trust can be weaponized. The term Trojan horse entered every language, every strategic discussion. From ancient Chinese military philosophy to Renaissance political theory to modern cybersecurity, the concept echoed forward through time. The pattern was clear: that which appears beneficial can conceal destruction, that which is welcomed can betray. In the immediate aftermath, Greek soldiers picked through the ruins of Troy, taking what treasures remained. But the real treasure was the lesson: psychological manipulation, playing on belief and desire, could achieve what brute force could not. The mind was the ultimate battlefield. Odysseus, architect of the deception, understood he had created something unprecedented. Traditional warfare was bound by codes of honor, by direct confrontation between warriors. He had introduced something new: the weaponization of trust itself. Victory through making the enemy collaborate in their own destruction. The psychological mechanisms exploited were multilayered. Confirmation bias made the Trojans see what they wanted: war's end. Authority bias made them trust their religious leaders' interpretations. The sunk cost fallacy made them believe the sacrifice must have been worthwhile. Each cognitive weakness was a thread in the trap. The death of Laocoon, whether divine intervention or elaborate staging by Greek agents hidden near Troy, demonstrated the power of seeming providence. When events align with desired narratives, skepticism evaporates. The serpents became proof of what the Trojans wanted to believe, overriding tactical caution with religious certainty. Sinan's performance was perhaps the most brilliant element. His lies succeeded because they contained kernels of truth. The Greeks were tired of war, true. They did want to go home, true. The horse was too large for the gates, true. Embedding deception within truth made it undetectable. The choice to make the horse a religious offering was tactically brilliant. Religion transcended rational analysis in ancient cultures. By framing the deception in sacred terms, the Greeks made questioning it seem like impiety. Fear of divine wrath silenced the voices of military caution. The scale of the horse was psychologically significant. Something so massive, requiring such labor and resources, seemed too elaborate for deception. The investment implied sincerity. The Trojans could not imagine the Greeks would commit such effort to a trick. They underestimated desperation's inventiveness. As Greek ships sailed home carrying Helen and the spoils of Troy, the soldiers reflected on what had occurred. They had witnessed warfare evolve. The age of heroes fighting in single combat was giving way to something more complex, wars of perception, manipulation, and psychological operations. In the centuries that followed, military theorists studied the Trojan horse relentlessly. Sun Tzu in China wrote of winning without fighting, of making the enemy defeat themselves. Machiavelli analyzed deception in statecraft. Clausewitz examined moral forces in war. All were exploring territory the Trojan horse had mapped. The Roman Empire, heir to Greek culture, particularly embraced this lesson. Roman victories often came through client states, bribes, diplomacy, and deception rather than legion strength alone. They understood that the greatest conquests began in the mind, with perception management and psychological dominance. During the medieval period, siege warfare technology advanced, but the psychological dimension remained crucial. Castles fell as often to bribed guards and hidden traitors as to siege engines. The Trojan horse lived on in countless medieval sieges where deception opened gates that force could not breach. The Renaissance saw the Trojan horse analyzed through new lenses. Humanist scholars examined its ethical dimensions. Was it honorable? Did the ends justify the means? These questions reflected growing sophistication about the relationship between morality and military necessity in statecraft. The printing press allowed the Trojan horse story to spread beyond scholarly circles. It became embedded in popular culture, referenced in everything from plays to political pamphlets. The educated and common alike understood the reference. It became shorthand for hidden betrayal. During the Enlightenment, thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot used the Trojan horse as allegory for how ideas infiltrate societies. They saw parallels between wooden horses and philosophical concepts. Both could enter defended spaces and transform them from within. The metaphor expanded beyond military application. The American Revolution demonstrated Trojan horse principles through intelligence operations and psychological warfare. Benjamin Franklin's propaganda, Washington's deceptions, the use of spies, all reflected understanding that battles are won in minds before they're won on fields. The revolution was as much psychological as military. Napoleon Bonaparte studied the Trojan horse and similar deceptions extensively. His campaigns combined tactical brilliance with psychological manipulation. He understood that military victory required controlling not just territory but perception, morale, and belief. The Corsican general was Odysseus reborn for the modern age. The American Civil War saw psychological operations reach new sophistication. Both Union and Confederate forces used deception, from dummy cannons to false intelligence. Grant's campaign against Vicksburg involved elaborate feints. The psychological dimension had become standard military practice. World War I brought industrial-scale psychological operations. Propaganda became a weapon as important as artillery. The British created entire fake armies with dummy tanks and wooden planes visible to German reconnaissance. The Trojan horse principle scaled to modern warfare, deception through elaborate false presentation. World War II represented the apex of classical Trojan horse strategy. Operation Fortitude before D-Day created an entire phantom army under Patton's command. The Germans believed the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. Modern technology enabled ancient deception at unprecedented scale. The double-cross system turned captured German spies into unwitting Trojan horses, feeding false intelligence back to Berlin. Each agent thought they were loyally serving the Reich while actually ensuring Allied success. The concept had evolved: the horse could be human, the gates informational. The Cold War transformed the Trojan horse into psychological and ideological warfare. Each superpower sought to infiltrate the other society with ideas, agents, and cultural products. The gates being breached were mental and cultural. The battlefield was consciousness itself. Intelligence agencies developed Trojan horse tactics to extraordinary sophistication. False defectors, disinformation campaigns, cultural infiltration through seemingly innocent exchanges, the repertoire expanded endlessly. The KGB and CIA became students and masters of what Odysseus had pioneered. In Vietnam, both sides employed psychological operations extensively. The Viet Cong's tunnel networks were physical Trojan horses, allowing forces to emerge behind American lines. The U.S. used propaganda and civic action programs. Each side sought to infiltrate the other support structure and perception. The fall of the Soviet Union demonstrated Trojan horse principles at civilizational scale. Western consumer culture, rock music, blue jeans, and ideas of freedom infiltrated Soviet society like warriors emerging from a wooden horse. The empire collapsed not from external assault but internal transformation. The digital age created entirely new forms of Trojan horse attacks. Computer viruses literally bore the name, malicious code hidden inside innocent-seeming programs. The parallel was exact: something invited inside that revealed its true dangerous nature only after bypassing defenses. Cybersecurity became a digital siege warfare where every email attachment, every software download, every website could be a potential Trojan horse. The gates were now firewalls and authentication systems. The warriors were lines of malicious code. But the principle remained unchanged from ancient Troy. Social engineering attacks exploited the same psychological weaknesses the Greeks had used on Troy. Phishing emails created trust through false authority. Scammers used confirmation bias and desire. The technology changed but human psychology remained constant, still vulnerable to well-crafted deception. Marketing and advertising became civilian applications of Trojan horse psychology. Products were positioned to appeal to desires and identities. Branding created emotional relationships that bypassed rational analysis. Consumer culture mastered infiltrating minds through wants rather than walls. Political campaigns adopted Trojan horse strategies with increasing sophistication. Candidates positioned themselves to match voter desires, even when policy intentions differed. Campaign messaging exploited cognitive biases. Spin doctors became the modern equivalents of Odysseus, crafting narratives to breach mental defenses. Disinformation campaigns in the information age represented Trojan horses at scale. False narratives disguised as news infiltrated societies through social media. The gates were trust in institutions and information sources. Once inside, false beliefs transformed understanding of reality itself. The COVID-19 pandemic saw Trojan horse tactics in both virus transmission and information warfare. The disease spread through trusted social connections. Disinformation about it spread through trusted sources. The pattern ancient Troy experienced played out globally, danger admitted through trust. Military theorists recognized that modern warfare had become predominantly informational and psychological. Kinetic operations existed within frameworks of perception management. The lesson of Troy was complete: control belief and you control behavior. Control narrative and you control nations. Corporate espionage employed Trojan Horse methods, employees recruited to steal secrets, products designed to gather intelligence, acquisitions that concealed hostile takeovers. The battlefield was market share and intellectual property. The methods remained psychological manipulation and concealed intent. Educational systems became vectors for Trojan Horse cultural transmission. Curricula shaped worldviews. Textbooks framed national narratives. Each generation's minds were infiltrated with ideas about identity, morality, and truth. The pattern Troy experienced scaled to civilizational transformation. Populist movements demonstrated how Trojan horse psychology could breach democratic systems. Leaders positioned themselves as outsiders while serving elite interests. Movements claiming to represent the people became vehicles for authoritarian impulses. The people themselves became the gates they opened. Artificial intelligence introduced new dimensions to Trojan horse possibilities. Deepfakes could make anyone appear to say anything. AI-generated content could mimic trusted sources. The gates were now human perception itself, and AI provided tools to craft perfect camouflage for deception. Social media platforms became vectors for modern Trojan horses. Algorithms that promised connection delivered division. Features that promised empowerment enabled manipulation. Users welcomed these platforms into their lives, not realizing they were opening gates to unprecedented surveillance and influence. Cryptocurrency and blockchain technology introduced financial Trojan horses. Platforms promising decentralization concentrated wealth. Systems claiming to democratize finance enabled new forms of fraud. The pattern held, revolutionary promise concealing traditional exploitation, admitted through desire for change. Climate change discourse became battleground for Trojan horse tactics. Denial was packaged as skepticism. Delay was framed as prudence. Industries that created the problem funded solutions that protected their interests. The infiltration was of policy and public understanding. The rise of nationalism in the 21st century showed how ancient psychological patterns persist. Populist leaders used the same techniques, appealing to fears, offering simple narratives, creating external enemies. The Trojan horse of authoritarian impulse entered democracies through democratic processes. Biotechnology raised possibilities of biological Trojan horses, designer viruses, genetic modifications, synthetic organisms. The gates were biological rather than architectural, but the principle remained, something appearing beneficial or neutral that transforms after admission, revealing dangerous true nature. Space exploration introduced interplanetary dimensions. As humanity considers colonizing other worlds, the question emerges, what Trojan horses might we unknowingly carry? Technologies, ideologies, biological systems, each could transform in alien environments, revealing unexpected consequences after the gates close behind us. Returning to ancient Troy, scholars excavating the historical site found layers of destruction and rebuilding. Multiple Troys existed over centuries. The archaeological truth was complex, but the legendary truth was more powerful. The Trojan horse story shaped civilization more than the historical city ever did. The distinction between myth and history blurred productively. Whether the Trojan horse was literal fact or literary invention mattered less than its truthfulness about human psychology. It captured something real about deception, trust, and cognitive vulnerability that transcended historical specifics. Modern psychological research validated what the Trojan horse exemplified: humans are pattern-matching creatures whose shortcuts can be exploited. Confirmation bias, authority bias, narrative bias, each represented a gate that deception could pass through. Understanding these weaknesses provided limited protection. The question emerged, in an age of unprecedented deception capability, how can truth be defended? The Trojans' mistake was not stupidity but humanity. They wanted to believe the war was over. Modern societies face the same challenge, maintaining skepticism while remaining functional and humane. Education about Trojan horse psychology became crucial. Teaching critical thinking, media literacy, and awareness of cognitive biases represented attempts to strengthen the gates. But perfect defense remained impossible. The human need for trust and meaning created perpetual vulnerability. Whistleblowers and investigative journalists became modern Cassandras, warning of hidden dangers that few wanted to believe. Like the Trojan prophetess, they were often dismissed or silenced. The parallel was exact: those who see deception clearly are often the least believed. The ethics of Trojan horse tactics remained contested. Some argued all's fair in war and competition. Others insisted on standards limiting deception. The debate reflected tension between effectiveness and morality, between winning and worthiness, between success and soul. International law attempted to regulate deception in warfare, with mixed success. Chemical weapons disguised as civilian goods, combatants disguised as civilians, false surrender signals, each violated norms. But enforcement was weak. The ancient lesson persisted: deception remained tempting because it often worked. Philosophical traditions grappled with the Trojan horse's implications for epistemology. How can we know what's real when perception is manipulable? Plato's cave gained new relevance. Descartes' radical doubt seemed prescient. The ancient story illuminated enduring questions about knowledge and reality. Religious traditions found meaning in the Trojan horse pattern. Satan as deceiver, false prophets, wolves in sheep's clothing, the themes echoed. Spiritual warfare was described in terms paralleling psychological warfare. The battle for souls mirrored the battle for cities. Literature from Homer to Shakespeare to contemporary novels explored Trojan horse themes endlessly. Every betrayal, every hidden motive, every trust violated echoed the pattern. The story provided a template for understanding human treachery across cultures and centuries. Film and television made the Trojan horse visual and immediate for mass audiences. From historical epics to spy thrillers to science fiction, the pattern appeared constantly. Each generation saw reflections of contemporary deceptions in the ancient story, making it perpetually relevant. Video games allowed players to enact Trojan horse strategies themselves. Stealth games, strategy games, role-playing games, many involved deception, infiltration, and betrayal. Interactive engagement with the pattern taught its logic more effectively than passive consumption. The metaphor expanded beyond its original meaning. Trojan horse described any hidden danger, legislative riders, contract fine print, product features that enabled surveillance. The concept became shorthand for any bait-and switch, any dangerous thing disguised as beneficial. Neuroscience revealed why Trojan horse tactics work biologically. Human brains evolved for quick pattern matching in survival contexts. The same shortcuts that helped ancestors identify threats made modern humans vulnerable to sophisticated deception. Evolution had not prepared consciousness for information warfare. The tragedy of the Trojans was that they were not fools. They were exhausted, hopeful humans who made understandable choices under pressure. The real lesson was not their stupidity but their humanity. Any society, any individual, given the right conditions, could make the same mistake. Contemporary societies faced this humbling recognition constantly. Financial crises, political upheavals, technological disruptions. Repeatedly, societies admitted dangers that seemed beneficial. The gates opened again and again. The pattern continued because the vulnerabilities were structural to human cognition and society. The Trojan horse taught that walls, no matter how strong, were only as secure as the decisions to open gates. Physical security could not substitute for psychological wisdom. The real battleground was always judgment, always the moment of choosing to trust or doubt. In cybersecurity, the human element remained the weakest link. No firewall stopped employees from clicking phishing links. No encryption prevented social engineering. The gates were human decision-making, unchanged from ancient Troy despite all technological advancement. The original Odysseus, wandering home after Troy's fall, faced his own deceptions and manipulations. His journey became metaphor for navigating a world of trickery. The trickster was also tricked. The manipulator was also manipulated. Psychological warfare cut both ways. The Greeks who entered Troy as hidden warriors emerged as changed men. Violence and deception leave marks on those who employ them. The psychological cost of psychological warfare affected victors as well as victims. Winning through trickery was still losing something essential. The legacy for Greek culture was complex. They had won through cunning, establishing it as legitimate military virtue. But this also raised questions about honor, about the warrior ideal, about what victory meant if achieved through deception rather than valor. Some Greek writers, including Homer himself in the Odyssey, suggested divine disapproval of the deception. The Greeks' difficult returns home, Odysseus's long wandering, suggested punishment. The gods, the stories implied, valued honor over victory. But humans chose differently. For Troy's descendants and cultural heirs, the story became one of tragic nobility destroyed by cunning treachery. Rome, claiming Trojan ancestry through Aeneas, honored Troy's courage while learning Greece's lesson. They would be both strong and clever, both honorable and pragmatic. The medieval code of chivalry arose partly as reaction against Trojan horse-style warfare. Knights sought to restore honor to combat, to make warfare transparent and rule-bound. But this noble effort repeatedly failed against pragmatic opponents willing to use deception. The tension between honorable and effective warfare never resolved. Each generation rediscovered it. Each conflict saw the debate renewed: should we fight as we wish our enemies fought, or should we fight to win? The Trojan horse posed the question for all time. In democratic societies, the Trojan horse pattern raised special concerns. Could democracy defend against deception without becoming authoritarian? How could free societies maintain necessary skepticism while preserving trust essential to democracy? The dilemma was fundamental. Authoritarian systems claimed advantage in defending against psychological warfare. Controlled information, limited foreign influence, surveillance, these could prevent infiltration. But they also created brittle societies unable to adapt, vulnerable to catastrophic failure when deception succeeded despite controls. The paradox was that perfect defense against Trojan horses required becoming closed, paranoid, unable to accept anything new. But societies needed openness to beneficial exchange, to trade, to cultural and intellectual progress. The gates had to sometimes open. The risk was permanent. Scholars studying resilience identified metaskills more valuable than specific defenses. Adaptability, critical thinking, emotional regulation, these allowed navigation of deceptive environments without paranoia. The goal was not perfect detection but wise response to uncertainty. Communities built on trust faced special vulnerability. Close-knit groups, whether small towns or online communities, could be devastated when trust was betrayed from within. The Trojan horse pattern scaled from individuals to civilizations, but hurt most at the intimate level. Therapeutic psychology addressed trauma from betrayal and deception. Trust violated created wounds harder to heal than physical injury. Victims of Trojan horse patterns in personal relationships, business, or politics carried psychological scars. The ancient story illuminated modern pain. Self-deception emerged as the ultimate Trojan horse. Individuals betrayed themselves, admitting dangerous ideas or behaviors by rationalizing them as beneficial. The gates were opened from within by the very consciousness meant to guard them. No external enemy needed. Addiction followed Trojan horse patterns precisely. Substances or behaviors welcomed for pleasure revealed destructive nature only after creating dependency. The individual became simultaneously victim and collaborator in their own destruction, opening and reopening the gates to their ruin. Ideologies could be Trojan horses. Political or religious systems welcomed as salvation revealed authoritarian or destructive dimensions only after becoming embedded in individuals and societies. The true believers became the gates they opened, unable to see the danger they had admitted. Environmental destruction followed the pattern globally. Industrial civilization was welcomed as progress, revealing its destructive relationship with ecology only after transforming societies beyond easy reversal. Humanity had opened gates to forces it struggled to control. The Anthropocene itself represented a Trojan horse, human capability to reshape Earth admitted through gates of progress and comfort, revealing catastrophic species-level risk only after the transformation was global and perhaps irreversible. The pattern scaled to planetary dimensions. Yet the Trojan horse story also suggested possibility of learning and adaptation. The tale survived because it taught. Societies that studied it gained insight into their own vulnerabilities. Awareness was not perfect protection, but it was better than ignorance. The story itself was medicine. Museums displayed Trojan horse imagery as historical artifact and contemporary warning. The story bridged past and present, specific and universal. Visitors saw reflections of their own time in the ancient tale. The wooden horse stood as permanent reminder of human vulnerability to well-crafted deception. Artists reimagined the Trojan horse for each generation. Painters, sculptors, filmmakers, digital artists, each found new angles on the ancient story. The creative engagement kept the lesson alive, adapting it to contemporary contexts while maintaining its essential truth about human nature. The story entered language as idiom and metaphor. Beware Greeks bearing gifts became proverbial. Trojan horse needed no explanation across cultures. The linguistic embedding ensured the lesson passed to those who never studied the original tale formally. Children's versions of the story introduced the concept early. Simplified for young minds but preserving the core lesson, not everything that looks good is good, not everyone who appears friendly is trustworthy. The psychological sophistication appropriate to each developmental stage. Academic disciplines from classics to psychology to computer science included the Trojan horse in their curricula. Each field found relevant applications. The story served as common reference point across specializations, one of few narratives that united humanistic and technical education. Military academies studied the Trojan horse alongside Sun Tzu and Clausewitz. Officer candidates learned that psychological preparation was as important as physical readiness. The lesson was clear: wars could be lost in moments of poor judgment, no matter how strong the forces. Business schools taught the Trojan horse as warning about mergers, partnerships, and strategic decisions. companies could admit threats disguised as opportunities. The parallel was exact. Corporate gates opened to proposals that appeared beneficial but concealed dangerous intentions. Medical education used the Trojan horse to explain disease vectors and drug delivery. Viruses exploited cellular trust mechanisms. Therapeutic Trojan horses disguised medicine as nutrients to bypass defenses. The biological parallel was not metaphorical but literal. Theological seminaries examined the Trojan horse alongside religious texts about deception, spiritual warfare, and discernment. The pattern appeared in sacred traditions worldwide. Evil entering disguised as good was fundamental to spiritual narratives across cultures. The emotional dimension of the Trojan horse story remained powerful. The tragedy wasn't just defeat but the hope that preceded it. The Trojans' joy at war's apparent end made the betrayal more cruel. Understanding this emotional arc was key to preventing similar patterns. Empathy for the Trojans was crucial. They were not cautionary idiots but humans who made understandable choices. This recognition prevented the arrogance of thinking, "We would never fall for that." Every generation, every society, faced its own wooden horses. The lasting power of the Trojan horse story lay in its simplicity and depth. A simple image, a wooden horse, contained layers of meaning about trust, deception, warfare, psychology, and human nature. This combination of memorable symbol and profound lesson ensured its immortality. 3 millennia after Troy fell, whether to a wooden horse or other causes, the pattern the story described remained active in human affairs. The technology changed, the contexts varied, but the psychological mechanics stayed constant. The story was not just history but instruction manual for the present. The ultimate lesson was humility. No wall was impregnable if consciousness could be infiltrated. No defense was perfect if judgment could be compromised. Security required not just strong gates but wise decisions about when to open them. The Trojan horse taught that victory goes not always to the strong but to those who understand the psychology of belief. The wooden horse that never was, or was, continues to stand in human imagination as the greatest deception in history. From ancient Troy to modern cyberspace, its legacy shapes how we understand trust, belief, and the eternal conflict between security and openness. The gates we guard are in our minds. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 3,000 years of psychological warfare. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay wise, and remember, the greatest battles are won in the mind, long before swords are drawn.